All right, well, kind of got a mess going on the bench here. We're gonna do some cleanup. It is thrashed. Had a couple pretty serious jam sessions out here. So, anyways, what we got sitting here though is a Homelite Super EZ that friend acquired, and it was kind of part of a trade deal. The saw is super clean. Pretty immaculate, really. And the only problem is it is scored, like big time. And I have no idea if this was the culprit on this one or not, but they have this decomp that's on the throttle lock. When you press it in, it just pops right out of the side of the cylinder right there. Anyways, they do not fit, and they seem like they'd be a place for an air leak. He said he's not attached to it, but I could tell the way he talked, he thinks it's a cool little saw. And I agree. So I told him I'd put it on my shelf and use it for parts. And he was okay with that. But what I didn't tell him is I had another one of these that was in a lot rougher shape, but the piston and cylinder are immaculate. So we're going to do a little swap. So I already tore the old one down, and talk about a jigsaw puzzle getting these things apart. You know, not the end of the world, but they are definitely a puzzle the way everything fits together. But what I'm going to do here is show you the cylinder, because while we had it off, we might as well do a little port work to it, of course, spice it up a little. So I'll show you what I did there, and hopefully I'll get some footage of this one when I tear it down. Hopefully I'll get some pictures, some side-by-side pictures with this one, so you guys have an idea what I did. But anyways, I'll show you that cylinder here. Okay, so I'll try and get a shot of this for you guys side by side. I don't know if it'll help or not help, or there's an alright shot. So that's the one after I ground on the upper transfer. There's what it looks like stock. Just so you have a comparison on that. Anyways, hopefully that'll come through clear. And then for the exhaust side, here's the factory one. And this is off of a different saw, but it looks pretty much identical. Or this one looked identical to this, minus the scoring, but it had the same amount of carbon buildup and everything else. So that's the one after I ground on it. And then looking through from the outside, you know, that one's all cleaned up. Obviously this one it isn't. That's about what it looked like. So you can run your saw too rich. It is a thing, and it does cause problems. Everything else on this saw was pretty tight, so I'm pretty positive that's what caused all the scoring, is carbon buildup. So originally there's a reed valve, direct reed valve saw, so it goes right into the crankcase. So there's not really any, intake timing number per se on that. But what I did do was time it, and the exhaust roof was at 105, and the transfers were at 120. The base gasket was like 13 thousandths thick, so when I ditched the base gasket, this went to 106 and 121 on the transfers. So what I did is I went in, raised this exhaust roof back up, and then some. I went 4 degrees higher than it was stock. So we're now at 101. This isn't going to be a long bar saw. Just want it snappy and fun. So we're at 101 and should be fine. So I went in there and cleaned that up. It won't. Oh, anyways. I left the bridge anyway, so I raised that exhaust to 101, gained some more RPM out of it. And then I went in, and in the upper transfers, and the primaries, back here, right, I raised them back to a 15-degree blowdown. So once I raised this back up to 101, those transfers were still at 121. So that gave me 20 degrees of blowdown, and it was originally 15, which is fine. 20 is a fine number. I don't mind. But what I did was I went back in and raised the primary transfer back to 116 to give it 15 degrees of blowdown again on that primary. And I kind of angled them. Oh, sorry, the light's not doing us any justice here. Come on, focus. There we go. Anyway, so I raised them back to 116. So we have the primary opens with 15 degrees of blowdown, and then the secondary is still 21. So a little bit of staggered there. And I angled them back around the back side here just a little bit to help push that charge out, flush it out the exhaust. But anywho, thought I'd give you an idea. That's all I did. I didn't do anything crazy. I'd love to find some different reeds. They're just metal. Oh yeah, I also told you I'd give you an idea what those reed pedals look like. That's them. It's a little stainless reeds. You can see where they seal right there around the edge. So we're gonna put them back in. We don't have anything different at this point. The other thing I did was take this Decomp I was talking about earlier on that arm pulls it out, and I'll get a picture of the one out of the saw when I pull it out. But all this is a little metal cylinder that rides down in the side here. No, you can't see anyways. But there's no like tight fitting anywhere. So here's the Decomp valves. That's what it looks like. Just fits down in there. That taper seals against the little port on the inside of the cylinder wall there. But it is not a tight fit. It gets built up with carbon. Both of them had carbon buildup all over the ends of them, so I don't think they were sealing all that great. And this saw definitely does not need a decomp. So that's why I JB welded the one on this in place. Because there's nothing tight about this decomp. So anyways, that's them, guys. Hopefully that'll give you a little bit better idea of what I did. It's nothing major, but clean it up, hopefully make it run a little better. It's just, it's got to be the worst seal I've ever seen out of a decomp valve. It's loose in there. There's a spring that holds down on this that keeps it forced in there. But on this one, like all old saws, it was completely packed with carbon, so it wasn't seating. So anyways, in my eyes, it's a point for an air leak, and I don't think you need a decomp on a saw this size. So we filled it with JB weld to eliminate the problem. So there's that. You can see where the decomp normally came in right there, that little hole. It's filled with JB weld, and then I replaced the valve, put it back in there, take up some space so I didn't have to fill the whole thing with JB weld. But you can see it just bled the compression off right out the exhaust port right there. So I didn't, however, I didn't fill this hole, but it does have some in it. They got pushed up in there from when I plugged that one. But anyways, I've done it on a few decomps. Just make sure to wipe that with your finger right there on the inside as soon as you get done with your JB weld. I take some acetone on a paper towel and wipe it in there, make sure it's all clean. And you'll actually end up, it's hard to, well, I won't be able to get it for you, but it's not even flush with the cylinder wall. When you use your finger, it actually wipes a little bit out, and so it's actually a, you know, concave right there, if you will. So it's not flat with the cylinder wall, it's actually recessed just a touch from wiping it out with your finger. But anywho, hopefully I'll get some side-by-sides pictures. There's those upper transfers, primaries. There's the exhaust port, so hopefully we'll have ourselves a runner. Maybe even a little ripper. they do pretty all right in factory trim, so hopefully we can improve on that a little bit. Since I deleted the decomp valve, or JB welded it, this arm right here can no longer go into that, otherwise your throttle lock button won't work. Because when you press this in to lock your throttle, it moves that arm, which normally engages that decomp and pulls it out. So what I ended up having to do was cut the end off short so it wouldn't go through the decomp, and then I bent it down actually so that it contacts the saw body. This is pointless to most people, or people don't care, but right there, the end of it hits the saw body. So this can't come out any further. Okay, so right there you can see that little end right in there is contacting the body of the saw. Because if you just cut it off and leave it normal, there's nothing any longer to hold to keep this held in. So it just has infinite movement and it'll come all the way out. So you'll see here in a second, I'll put it back together, but by bending that end to hit the saw body, this can only come out so far. That only, when this is depressed, it only lets it come out to the factory position, as if it was hooked into the decomp, even though it's not. So I'll show you that here. And it doesn't matter. You could have just, you know, I wanted to retain the high idle button, I guess, and it's the only way to do it. Without, otherwise, if you take this rod completely out, that button will just pop out. But so now the throttle lock still works, and then when you squeeze the trigger, that just goes back against the saw body. And what that does is lets this throttle lock still work and stay in factory position. So when it comes, when you release it, it only goes that far because it's limited on the bottom against the body of the saw. If it wasn't limited down there, this button would just come all the way out. There's nothing holding it in there. So anyways, everything other than that little tiny spot where it actually hits the decomp, nobody would know any different. It all looks factory, so that's the way I like to try and keep things. That's a workaround if anyone else is trying to do that and keep their high idle button. So I don't think that I've ever just jumped into porting a saw without having run it first. Bottom line, I got lazy. I didn't want to tear two saws completely down, swap an engine, put it back together, run it, tear it back down, port it, put it back together. So I'm a lazy sack is what it boils down to. So I just went in and ground on it, and it runs well, so I didn't ruin it, but I have no baseline to go off of, which is kind of opposite of what I like. So fun little mess around saw that was destined for the garbage anyways. So I figured I'd just go for it, and it turned out all right. But it's kind of backwards from any way I've ever done it before. Jacob, I don't know if you watch this at all ever, but here's your little jewel. I'll put back together, ready to rip. Okay, so I finished that Homelite EZ. Everything went back together great. Fired it up. It ran all right up high, but not down low. It would just, at idle, it would just load up and die. So this is what I found. I'm not sure it's 100% the culprit, but we're going to start here. I've encountered it before with aftermarket carb kits. This one's the OEM Walbro one, and you can see that little tit on the bottom, how shallow it is. You can see how thick that one is. Ooh, sorry, I'm a little shaky here. It's easily like twice the thickness. I've encountered it with aftermarket stuff. I don't know if they don't account for certain carburetors or what, but what we're going to do is, since we have a rough guide for thickness here, we're going to grind that one down and see if we can't make it work. But just wanted to hit on that because I've encountered this where that little tit in the center will be a different height than what your factory carburetor needs. So, just a heads up. We'll call that good. Got this thing put back together. Got it ported a little bit. Nothing major, just cleaned up, changed the timing a little bit. So got that carburetor fixed. Got that diaphragm set better, so see how it does. Anyways, holds its own for being a little pee-weezer. I think he'll be happy.